So what is the Bible and what's in it?
Well, let's start with that question, what is it?
I know it's a book.
Very true. But even more than that, it's a collection of books and letters, almost a library in and of itself. The Bible actually contains 66 books and 40 authors contributed to writing it.
It must have taken a while to get all of that together.
It did. In fact, the Bible was written over the span of 1,500 years, and it's broken up into two main sections called the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament was collected over the course of 1,000 years and was written by prophets.
Prophets?
Yes, men and women that God used to speak directly to his people, like messengers. The Old Testament talks all about God's relationship with his people, also known as the nation of Israel, and constantly talks about the coming of a Messiah, which is another word for Savior. The New Testament picks up right away with the fulfillment of this promise through a man named Jesus, and it continues to talk about the beginning of a movement called the Way, or as we like to call it today, the Church.
So obviously the Bible covers a lot of ground. Can there really be one common story throughout all of this?
That is a fantastic question, but it's also a big one. So buckle up and let's start all the way back at the beginning. The first book of the Bible, Genesis, which actually means beginning, starts by painting us this beautiful picture of creation and makes two things very clear. God is the creator of everything, and his most valuable creation is human beings because he created us in his own image.
Oh, so kind of like a self-portrait.
Sure. Yeah, I'd say that's actually a pretty good analogy.
Wow, what an honor.
It really is. It puts such a high value on the life of every human being, but it also comes with quite a bit of responsibility.
What do you mean?
Well, you see, God didn't create us as robots to just do whatever he tells us to do. We get to choose. So since we are created in the image of God, we have the responsibility to make the choice to represent him well, or not. The first two human beings, Adam and Eve, were faced with this choice in the Garden of Eden. God gave them a very clear instruction. They could eat of any tree in the entire garden except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Unfortunately, they disobeyed God, eat from the tree, and because of this decision, they were kicked out of the garden. Sin entered the world and life changed forever.
Honestly, that seems like a strange and pretty random command, and a small offense to get kicked out of the garden for.
I know it might seem kind of strange, but you have to understand that the decision whether or not to eat from the tree represents a much larger decision. A decision that every single human being who has ever lived has had to make. Do I trust God's standards for good and evil, or do I trust my own? Or to put it more simply, do I follow God, or do I follow myself?
Oh, so that decision was actually a really big deal, and humanity is off to a kind of rough start.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's only going to get worse before it gets any better. After Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden, the world goes downhill fast. No one is choosing to follow God's standards for good and evil, and even after God hit the reset button by flooding the earth, we still see the world evolve into a violent, evil, and broken society called Babylon. In fact, it's so bad that God decides to mix up everybody's languages and scatter people all over the planet.
Man, it seems like they have completely lost touch with God.
That's exactly right. But thankfully, because of God's great love for the people he created, he came up with a plan to reestablish a close connection with us. It all started with an elderly couple named Abraham and Sarah. He speaks to Abraham and tells him that his family and ancestors will become a great nation and that from this nation, the whole entire world would be blessed. God makes it clear that this nation will not be like others. They will be set apart and have a personal relationship with God. This one family eventually becomes known as the nation of Israel.
Okay, that's why the Bible mentions Israel so much. So God's plan was that Israel would represent him to the rest of the world. Well, how did they do?
Not so great. The people kept making the same mistakes Adam and Eve made in the very beginning. They kept choosing their way over God's way. This is when God sent prophets as his messengers, and the people would listen to them for a little while, but always turn back to their old selfish ways. The rest of the Old Testament is this roller coaster ride of the nation of Israel following God, then not following God, trusting him, then not trusting him.
So if Israel, who were guided directly by God, failed, who could possibly succeed?
That is a really good question, and it reminds me of an important detail I forgot to mention. You see, throughout this roller coaster of the Old Testament, we read over and over again about a Messiah who would come to save and deliver all people. Someone who could do what Israel could not. Someone who would perfectly choose God's way and conquer the curse of evil and sin. But suddenly, the Old Testament just ends. No Messiah, no Savior, just silence. for 400 years.
Whoa. Well, thank God that is not the end of the story.
Agreed. Really, it's just the beginning. The New Testament picks up 400 years after the Old Testament left off with a baby whose family was from Nazareth, born in Bethlehem. He is a part of the Israelite nation, the family of Abraham. His name is Jesus, and word begins to spread that he is the Messiah that had been promised so many years ago.
Wait, really? A baby? Not exactly what I picture when I think of a savior and leader.
Yeah, well, it wasn't what the Israelites imagined either. But he's exactly the savior they, you, and I need. Eventually, Jesus grew up into a man and he began creating waves wherever he went. He claimed to be here to fulfill all the things talked about in the Old Testament. He confronted the evil every other person had fallen victim to and overcame it. He taught about God's definition of good and evil and that real power comes from serving others. We slowly realize that he is actually God himself in human form who has come to make right all the things humanity has never been able to do on our own. To bear the weight and penalty of sin and evil that corrupts the world and offer new life to anyone who trusts in him.
Wow, awesome. The people must have been so encouraged and so relieved.
Well, many were, but not everyone believed Jesus. Some thought he was a liar, grabbing for power, and eventually they had him executed. But little did they know that this was all part of God's plan. By dying a criminal's death, even though Jesus himself was flawless, he took the penalty that each and every one of us deserve. His sacrificial love was so strong that even death could not stop him. Just as he willingly laid down his life, he willingly took it back up again and rose from the dead, conquering sin and death.
Man, this is all so cool. But I'm wondering, what does this mean for us?
Well, it means that we're faced with another choice. Stick with the old way of being human, where we choose our own definition of good and evil over God's, or enter into a new story. A story where Jesus is our savior and our example of how to live. The people who choose to enter this story, the way of Jesus, began a movement we start reading about in the book of Acts and for the rest of the New Testament.
Oh, you mean all those letters?
Exactly. Following Jesus is hard. Jesus' followers have faced opposition from the outside world, but also opposition internally, with confusion, disagreements, and even compromise. So early church leaders wrote letters to encourage the churches that existed all over the world, and we can still look at those letters for encouragement today. They are great reminders of what it means day by day to love God and love others. They also talk over and over again about a future hope when Jesus fulfills his promise to come again. Evil is finally eradicated and heaven and earth are united.
The Bible paints such a beautiful picture. It's amazing to see God's plan for his creation play out over such a long period of time.
Yeah, the Bible really comes to life when we're able to see the overarching story of God partnering with his beloved creation, people. Regardless of how far we strayed, God never gave up on us. His love for his people is eternal and unconditional. The Bible can change our lives when we realize that we get to be the continuation of this story as each of us face the same choice that Adam and Eve faced in the very beginning.
Thank God we have the Bible to help us choose God's way and follow Jesus.
Hey, thanks so much for checking out our YouTube channel. You're still here, so why not stay a while? Drop a like and click that red button to enjoy fresh, new Northview Students content every single week. You'll be challenged, encouraged, and inspired. So, what are you waiting for? See you later.